trailer bill language. This was a privacy issue that was addressed in previous legislation. Ultimately, the trailer bill in which the language was contained was not approved for unrelated reasons. During that time, folks came forward, raised some concerns about privacy issues. I want to thank the Commissioner and CHB for trying to work those issues through. We're at a place that I think is quite good, frankly, from a privacy standpoint. And while I'm sure it won't make everyone happy, I think it's something that we can be pleased about. So at this point, I would gratefully entertain a motion to adopt the trailer bill language for item number 2, CHP.
So moved.
Motion by Lowenthal. Call the roll.
Senator Simitian?
Aye.
Senator Fuller? Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
2-0, that's sufficient, but we're going to hold the roll open for absent members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
That takes us to the DMV. The Governor has proposed one technical change in an April finance letter, which is described in issue number 2. But before we get there, let's go to issue number 1. And this is the continuing conversation on delays in California driver's licenses. Why don't we ask the DMV, where are we and what's been happening since last we met?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Senator Lowenthal. George Valverde, Director, Department of Motor Vehicles. When we last met on February 1st, I think I expressed hope that we would be within a reasonable time frame of getting caught up by the middle to the late March. And we were on track to meet that time frame. However, I think as we experienced, we had some subsequent delays in our process. What these were attributed to were, again, a subcontractor who provides the UV toner for the printing of the document had some defects in the toner. As we later found out, we relied on the, L1 relied on that subcontractor to, do the quality control. The subcontractor, came to Sacramento, saw the quality of the product and the unacceptable nature of our cards, and subsequently made some changes to it. I think L1 has also incorporated their own quality control on the toner. That delay in itself took almost 3 weeks. And while we were not party to what was the situation on a day-to-day basis, we did expect that L1 would continue producing our driver's license and ID cards. I think it was only after we were experiencing up to 5, 6, 7 days of not receiving any documents that we became more engaged in what was going on a day-to-day basis with their production. Since that time, I can tell you that the department has done a number of things to directly deal with our customers. One of the things that we did was, as people apply for a driver's license or ID card, we issued a temp driver's license, and those temp driver's license were for a 90-day period. We also established an email system with a mail address to deal with specific issues that some of our customers were having. And I can tell you today we have addressed almost all of those email issues that are outstanding. In addition to that, we worked with TSA, we worked with rental car agencies, we worked with law enforcement to ensure that, one, they would accept the temp driver's license and to let them know what our situation was during this interim period. Well, I can tell you today, our website, which has been a means for people to see what data production we're at. We're currently at April 12th in terms of producing our driver's license, which would give us, within a 2-week backlog, That's below 200,000, which I think by the middle to late. I would say probably by the middle to late May, we will be within the 48-hour turnaround time that we expect. In addition to that, I will say that one of the issues that we identified early was a high level of error rates, and I explained that we had errors of 5 to 10%. Well, because of the redundancies, the additional staff, the fact that they've incorporated a 24/7 operation, their error rate has come down considerably, and it's now in the 1 to 2% range. That gives us, a great deal of comfort in terms of being able to, we think, demonstrate compliance with our expectation of delivering driver's license and ID cards to our customers within the 7 to 10 days of their application.
Let me ask you to distinguish, please, between sort of routine delays, strike that, between delays that are sort of widely experienced as a result of this problem and the phenomenon that someone has to deal with if they're one of the folks where there's been a problem with their license. It seems to me we've had two different issues here. As a function of all these problems, there have been fairly widespread delays in the system. Do I get that part right? I'm looking at your factory backlog, and I'm seeing, delays of what looked like to meet as much as 3 weeks plus in terms of the number of days that things got backlogged. That's different than the other issue of concern, which is what happens if somebody's got one of those that got kicked back, which at one point I believe was as high as 20%.
That's correct.
Okay. So those are sort of two different experiences,
yes,
depending on which Californian you are.
Yes.
Okay. Who's here from the LAO's office?
Russia Chavez with the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Ms. Chavez, yeah?
Yes.
Thanks. You're our test case, Ms. Chavez. So if Ms. Chavez goes in and her license gets kicked back because it's not been handled properly by either the vendor, the sub-vendor, or DMV, how long did she have to wait? I'm not talking about the average wait as a result of the delays. I'm talking about someone who had the misfortune to be one of those once 20% and now we hope 1 or 2%.
Unfortunately, I can't tell you because that varies from individual to individual, and I can tell you early on, we did not anticipate the level of remakes, as I think is what you're referring to. Those errors that we found and having to go back to the vendor to remake those. As you can imagine, they build a production facility to deal with the normal process of processing 40,000 driver's license on a daily basis. Now, if you consider that they're producing 40,000 a day, and then within that 40,000 you have 20% of those are in error, you're accumulating up to another 8,000 per day that then they have to remake at some point. Initially, we were not prepared on how to incorporate that within the normal workload. L1 was not prepared to incorporate that within the normal workload. We started acknowledging or trying to develop a process for that probably in the middle of November. So here it was a month, and during that month time frame, you're right, there were people that were caught without a driver's license that may have applied in early October, that they got caught because of the error that...
Excuse the interruption, Mr. Valverde, but I think to the DMV's credit, eventually the temporary licenses were issued for 90 days rather than 60 days.
Yes.
That would suggest that was because there was a problem that you wanted to address, and that would suggest the problem was that people were going at least 2 months without having a license come back to them. Otherwise, they all could have used the temporary license they got. Is that a fair conclusion on my part?
Well, we don't issue temporary licenses to all renewals. If you come into a field office, you'll get a renewal for a temp for 60 days. That's our normal process.
And my point is that when you extended that to 90 days, the reason you extended it to 90 days was because you had people walking in the door saying, for God's sakes, man, it's been 2 months and I still don't have a license.
Well, it was because of both things, because we were experiencing delays in our normal process that got to
So
that.
it was both the error rate and the delay that the error rate itself caused.
Yes.
Okay. We're down to 2% from
Yes.
20%. What's an acceptable level in terms of kickbacks to the, poor choice of words, returns to the folks at the vendor?
The contract calls for less than 0.5%, and our staff are equipped to handle that level of error rates. In fact, that if you look at past performance prior to execution of this production in October, having upwards of 10, 20 cards, because that's what we're talking about, a day was, easily for us to address. But when you're talking about hundreds or thousands, that required us to develop a whole nother process.
The vendor is here, or at least has a representative here, I believe, from L1. Could we ask them to come forward, please? Right here at the table is fine. We can move a microphone over to your chair. Welcome, and if you'd identify yourself for the committee and members of the public.
I'm Bob Naylor. Thank you. I'm Bob Naylor. I represent L1 Identity Solutions.
Anything you can add to what we've heard from the DMV?
Well, let me start by saying that L1 regrets the inconvenience to tens of thousands of Californians that the problems in our process caused. We have done significant things to our production facility. We've increased the capacity by 26% above the contract requirement in order to be able to handle, to catch up, so to speak, if things go wrong. And that's working very well. We've added redundancies, so we have extra printers, extra machines around to fall back on if something goes wrong, and we don't have to shut down the system.
Excuse the interruption, but we had a conversation previously, and I'm still not clear. L1 made a point in its communication with the committee of the fact that it repeatedly described itself as a trusted provider to, I believe, 44 states. I got to tell you, the trust level on my part's pretty close to nil at this point.
I understand.
But as a trusted provider of 44 states, why was, and I understand again that the license for California is a whiz-bang license with all kinds of marvelous features, but if the company's in 40 plus other states, why did all this come as a surprise? Why is the redundancy a problem given the scope of the operation, which is national?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have an answer for that question. I know that things went wrong that we certainly didn't expect to go wrong, and produce in volumes that we certainly didn't expect, and we had to therefore add redundancies and capacity, go back and set up quality control at the source of at the suppliers that we're in charge of, so we know when something arrives in California at the machine at the factory that it's not going to cause several days of shutdown. We've done a lot of things. I personally just don't have information to suggest why more things seem to have gone wrong here than in most other states. Although there have been problems in other states.
20% is just a remarkable number. I mean, Mr. Valverde, I do mean to be flip. You ever work in a pants factory?
No, I haven't.
Well, in a pants factory, you got to put a zipper in a pair of pants before they put it out in the market. How would you feel if you were a vendor and you were selling pants and 20% of the zippers didn't work?
Wouldn't feel well.
Yeah, and frankly, if you're a consumer, knowing that only 1 or 2% of the pants have zippers that are not going to work well is probably not all that comforting for all 100 of the consumers who bought those pants. So it just, we sort of toss these numbers out like 20% is not that big a deal, and now we're down to 1 or 2%. And, for any California driver who wants to get a license, they're just worried that they're one of those 1 or 2%, or that they're going to be delayed as a result of the backlog caused by the problem, even if they get a, quote, good license, on a less-than-time basis. We talked at the previous meetings, and I want to go to colleagues here in a minute, but about what kind of efforts DMV was going to pursue and L1 was prepared to provide to sort of make things right. Things have only gotten worse since that time. Where are we on that?
If I may, I think, as I said earlier today, we are mailing cards, applications. That
I'm sorry, I perhaps wasn't clear. I meant, what are the consequences for the failure to perform in an acceptable manner?
And as I mentioned before, we have imposed the breach provisions of the contract, and we're actually, assessing damages to L1. At the same time, we have not paid, L1 for any of the production. They have produced upwards of 4.5 million cards since the contract was executed.
Mr. Valverde, I'm going to interrupt you again. I apologize. And let me just say this out loud for those who don't know. Mr. Valverde, I've known you for a while. I like you and I enjoy working with you. Mr. Naylor, I've known you even longer, and I like you and I enjoy working with you. So now my question is, that's great, but what's the total value of the contract, and what is L1 prepared to do to say, we fouled up and we're not going to charge you for that cost given the extent to which we fouled up? And what is DMV doing to pursue a solution? What I've heard is, we're talking, and that's what we heard a few months ago. So where are we?
Well, L1 has incurred significant additional expense to make this right.
L1 has incurred additional significant expense because L1 failed to deliver on their contract with the people of California. They got no one to blame but themselves. So I'm sorry. So where are we on what L1 is going to do to make things right with the state of California?
What we're trying to do is get back in total compliance with the contract, including, by the way, absolute prioritization of any ongoing remake problem, so that they don't just join a new batch.
Is it L1's position that the full value of the contract should be paid by the state of California, notwithstanding the fact that for pushing a year now, we've had up to 20% failure rate, and we've had delays of months for California drivers?
I've not had a conversation with L1 about that question, so I can't answer that. We are incurring the liquidated damages pursuant to the contract.
And is there a dollar amount?
It's the damages, the liquidated damages are up to 5% of the contract, which constitutes $3.1 million.
And has some agreement been reached on whether or not the liquidated damages is to be?
We have come to an agreement that we will assess our actual damages, and we're accumulating our costs as we go through this process, both in terms of the programming costs to issue the 90-day temps, the requirement to establish an additional email system and responding to those, the additional staff overtime to do the quality control of the cards that we were reviewing. So we're accumulating our costs of those additional efforts, and we will be assessing those when we recognize their first invoice.
So if all of those costs were assessed and received, that would mean we would break even for a year's worth of aggravation, and millions of California drivers who had the aggravation would sort of not have any. There's no assessed damages for other than your actual out-of-pocket costs, which means that from the standpoint of the public, there's no acknowledgement of the damage that was done to the public, or the inconvenience suffered by the public, or the challenge that the public had going about their business without the driver's license that they ordered in a timely fashion, but which came best case for many months, weeks late, and in some cases months late if they were unfortunate enough to be in the mythical Ms. Chavez's position of having gotten one of those bad licenses returned from L1. So my question is, I understand that the actual damages in terms of dollar cost to DMV, what about damages and compensation for the failure to provide the product to the public? I mean, we tell them there's a cost, they pay the fee, they show up, they expect a product on a timely basis. That's not an unreasonable expectation. It's kind of a basic level of service from government. Mr.
I have
Naylor?
no information on what L1 is prepared to do in that regard.
All right, well, I'm going to come back to that in just, Mr. Ralph, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Then the next observation I'm going to make is, it sounds to me like L1 has clearly failed to deliver the product consistent with their contract, and it sounds to me like DMV was frankly slow out of the gate in recognizing and responding to that failure. Is that an unfair characterization on my part? And if so, why?
I accept that responsibility that we were slow to recognize it. However, we did rely on our contractor. I think as our experience with this contractor was, we had 30 years of experience with them producing driver's license. It was a much more sophisticated, document. They demonstrated the ability to perform. I can say, though, in hindsight, looking at the number of contracts that they executed, nationwide during that 2-year period, it appears to us that they had resource demands beyond their ability, to perform. And clearly they were moving resources from, the squeaky wheel, as you might say, from Texas to Nebraska to Washington, and California was just in line like any other state.
I cannot tell you how wholly unacceptable I think that response is. The staff has recommended that we reduce the DMV's budget by $24 million to keep the budget open by sending it to the conference committee. And I believe that number is essentially a function of the a percentage of the contract for these services. Is that correct? Let me check with that.
It's a 10% of the DMV's budget for ID cards and driver's licenses.
Well, let me tell you the concern I have, and then we'll go to committee members. I'm not really interested in impacting the budget for driver's licenses and ID cards, because it seems to me that has the potential to have an adverse impact on members of the public. I think what I'd like to do is ask the staff to calculate and come back at the next meeting with 20% of the administrative budget for DMV. And I would be prepared at a subsequent meeting to offer a motion that we forward this item with a 20% reduction in the administrative of DMV, and maybe that'll get a little attention in the system to solving this problem and identifying what level of damages L1 is going to provide. I'd also like to ask that we put the DMV and L1 back on our hearing agendas for May 5 and May 12th with focus on what L1 is prepared to do. And Mr. Naylor, I know you're their representative, but I think we're at the point now where we can't take, I'm just a representative, I don't know what the company wants to do as an answer anymore. We've been doing that one for about 4 months. So I think either you need to get that information or you need to have someone from L1. How big is the total contract?
$63 million.
For $63 million, they should put their backside in a chair in this committee room if they want to keep doing business with California, in my view. And we need to get some answers on what they're prepared to do, not simply to reimburse for actual costs, but to pay damages for the actual impact of the failure to deliver per the contract is. And that's the recommendation I would suggest. Questions or comments from members of the committee? Ms. Fuller, thank you.
By strange coincidence, I was one of the persons who didn't get their driver's license in the mail. So I have a few from the ground up kind of comments, and I appreciate your perspective on it, and let me weigh in with what I think is kind of the practical approach. Number one, I think we are in the place where the chair has broached the subject before, and we've got lots of other things, and so to have to deal with it a second time is fairly annoying. And I assume from the chair's questions that it will be less agreeable if you have to come back on multiple times on this issue. So I would first urge you to provide him with the timeline for what your preparation is. As a former administrator, I've been on that hot seat before. School textbooks, it's the same way. Everybody in the United States gets textbooks at the same time, and so they're often late because the companies can't gear up just for California. They gear up for everybody else, and they have specialty things for California always because that's how we are. And so it's always an issue. And then you get to this place where, for schools, you have to have a textbook on the first day of school. It's kind of not acceptable to parents to not have one. And so, you're in the dilemma of specialized product that you can't get from anybody else. You got to get it here. And everybody else needs stuff too. So I guess I would just like to say that I'm sure that in your contract there is it sounds like it's a 5% withholding for any kind of delays or whatever. And that sounds like that's about $3.1 million. I think you ought to provide us with that's where the contract is, and that's something that we're going to be sort of expecting to happen if things don't get resolved. Number two, we're moving to another place now, which is what are the damages? I don't think we can negotiate that here. It's very complex. In my case, it was just I got a letter in the mail, and it basically said, "Here, stick this letter in your license, in your driver's license, and when you get your driver's license in a couple of weeks, it'll all be fine." And it was, I stuck the letter in with my license, and my license showed up fairly shortly, and I was not inconvenienced in the least. Although I would not advocate that that's a good solution. I would advocate that I didn't suffer any damages whatsoever. So there's probably a lot of people who suffered no damages. Maybe there were some that did. So the amount of harm that you have to deal with is probably kind of a court case or a negotiated case or something else. And I get that maybe the timeline for how you're going to solve that is probably what you should provide to us. And it sounds like if there's a delay in that this may end up going to conference committee. And I don't know what the chair's preference is, but if we're thinking about that, I guess the rules are we only have to have $1,000 withholding or something to make it go through that process. But I don't think you want to go there. With that, my personal experience was that, while I would not have liked this to happen in the first place, and while I would not have thought it prudent that it was here a second time, the damages might have been not as much as we think, but I think that the administrative budget is a better place than the license plate budget, a much more fair place to be looking at, even though that makes it difficult for you, I understand. So I'm, I guess, supporting most of what you said, but I would like to sort of urge that they get it done and get you some information, and that we follow the normal contract procedures that are called out and specified, and we have a timeline of when you are going to resolve this with the vendor. Thank you.
Senator Lowenthal, any comments or questions on this item?
I think there's little I can add. I support the chair's movement towards looking at the administrative budget. I think, too, I would hate for us to have any more impact upon the residents and the drivers of California, and I look forward to the next few meetings.
Great, thank you. And to underscore something that Senator Fuller said with respect to paring back the administrative budget, she said, I think quite correctly, that would make it difficult for you. Let me be very clear. That's my goal. Because it appears to me that's the only way we're going to get the response that the committee and the public are entitled to. The liquidated damages provision of $3 million plus, do you have even a seat of the pants? Those are the pants with the good zippers now. Seat of the pants sense for whether or not that's an adequate amount to cover the actual out-of-pocket costs that the DMV has experienced?
Yes, well, based on our costs to date, we think it's within reason to assume that's sufficient.
Then without negotiating here at the table, I would encourage you and L1 to be talking about what the rest of the room is between actual out-of-pocket costs and the liquidated damages provision of 5% to make things right with the California public. I think that's the first place the conversation ought to be going. I think if there aren't consequences, that a vendor like this will just figure they can do it again, and they may move from state to state in terms of who is at the short end of the transaction. But I think there need to be consequences beyond simply reimbursing you for actual out-of-pocket costs. All right, we will see you the next time. And again, Mr. Naylor, please be sure that you're either informed and authorized by the client or that the client is in fact here. Otherwise, further consequences will follow.
This will smile.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just want to be sure that there's no action. It's just holding it open. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to ask. We have asked staff to come back with a calculation on administrative budget, and we've also asked that these folks are going to be with us on a regular basis until we get to a place where we're satisfied with the conclusion to the story. Okay. All right. Thank you again. That takes us to item number 2, which is the April capital outlay finance letters. Why don't we ask DMV to present the issue?
My understanding of these are reappropriation items that were previously appropriated, and due to delays in getting working drawings finalized, we need the authority to for the budget year to continue these projects.
All right. Finance, LAO. Any member of the public would like to speak? The staff recommendation is to hold these items open. Committee members, any questions or comments on these items? The only comment I would have is that my willingness to move forward with these authorizations will to some extent be tied with my confidence in the department, which will to some extent be tied to a satisfactory result of the previous conversation we've had previously. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Before we leave your items, we do have a couple of items that we had where we had members out of the room. We're going to go back to open the roll. Just I know members are struggling with multiple committee assignments this morning. Why don't we ask? First item is the California Highway Patrol, and I believe this is a vote-only item, and this is for the CHP enhanced radio system. Please call the roll. The vote is 1-0. Chair voting aye.
Sure. Fuller? Aye. Lowenthal?
Aye.
Thank you very much. 3 votes. That measure is out.
The next one you did, yeah.
The next one is the policy for license plate readers. I believe the current vote is 2-0 with the chair voting aye.
Fuller?
Okay. And that takes us to the Department of Motor Vehicles, where we had no formal vote or action. Thank you again to the folks from DMV and to those who were here for those items. All right, that takes us to high-speed rail, and we're on page 7 of our published agenda, just to confirm with staff. Page 7 of our published agenda. Okay. All right, thank you very much, folks. We are at the High-Speed Rail Authority item. We are at page 7 of our agenda. The first issue that we have teed up is a conversation that is focused around a joint statement that was issued by Congresswoman Anna Eshoo from San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties, as well as by Assemblymember Rich Gordon, who represents portions of San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, and myself. About a week or so ago, there was a joint statement that we issued. We did not attempt to design the entire system from San Francisco to San Jose. We did, however, lay out a few criteria that we thought were explicit and helpful with respect to what high-speed rail done right on that stretch of the corridor might look like. and we wanted to have a little conversation about that today. And I want to be very clear. All three of the folks who spoke, Congresswoman Eshoo, Assemblymember Gordon, and myself, continued to describe ourselves as supporters of high-speed rail done right. That's a phrase that I think we have been using for probably a year and a half now, or something like it. My own personal preference would have been to avoid the need to issue the statement. I have said repeatedly in a variety of forums, both here and in speaking with my constituents, designing the high-speed rail project for California is definitely outside my job description. That being said, after waiting a year and a half to have someone come forward and describe what high-speed rail done right looks like from the authority, I came to the conclusion that if I wanted to push the project in that direction, I was going to have to provide some at least broad outline of what I thought that looked like, and as it happens, my colleagues in government shared that view, as well as shared the view about what high-speed rail done right up and down that particular corridor looked like. I want to be very clear, and a copy of the statement is attached, that all of that is in the context of the larger project. I understand that folks have to make decisions with a statewide perspective, even as they are sensitive to local concerns. I think all three members of this committee at various times have indicated their agreement with that view, that local concerns need to be addressed, but that's as part of a larger debate and discussion about the system. And so what I wanted to do was ask folks from High Speed Rail here today to respond to the statement and to have some conversation about that, because this is not just a question about impact on a local corridor. This is also a question about the very viability of the proposal in terms of its ability to move up and down that corridor, which means by definition it's also a conversation about the viability of the whole project, since the project has to get from one end of the state to the other, or it isn't a project under Prop 1A. It's also a financial issue. At the risk of stating the obvious, the funds are not unlimited for this project. And if anything, there's a great deal of ambiguity about where remaining funds in whatever amount, whether you think it's another $30 billion or another $50 billion, are likely to come from. So to the extent that we saw an opportunity to reduce costs up and down the corridor, that also, in our view, meant that the project writ large is more likely to be viable over the long haul if we can avoid unnecessary expense. Why don't I go ahead and just reference the items on page 8 and ask the High Speed Rail Authority to introduce the folks who are here today. We appreciate their being here, and to respond and tell us how they could get to yes if that's possible, and if not, let us know that as well and tell us why not. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Roelof van Ark. I'm the CEO of the High Speed Rail Authority, and I have with me Danae Aitchison, who's our counsel for CEQA and environmental issues, and Kerry Provahidi. She's here for the financial part if we get to it.
And could I ask the counsel, your last name is what again, please?
It's Aitchison, which is Aitchison.
Aitchison.
Aitchison, Scottish.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ray. I just, when I refer to someone, I'd like to have their name right.
I think you know Kerry Provahidi, also a bit of a difficult name, but she's been here more often.
Thank you, Ms. Provahidi. Welcome.
So, Mr. Chairman, members, firstly, thank you. I'd like to say thank you, firstly, for appointing 2 new board members to our board. This was, in my opinion, a great achievement. Bob Balganorth, who's actually here, he unfortunately has to leave because he's got another commitment this afternoon, as well as Jim Hartnett. I think both of them will be good contributors to the board of High Speed Rail, and they both have been appointed through the Senate, so I think that's a good achievement. We greatly appreciate, and Senator Smithian, you've often said that the commitment that you and also the other co-authors of the statement have to making high-speed rail happen, and also to your commitment to doing it right, because we also want to do it right. I obviously must tell you that our board has not given comment to your thoughts yet. We haven't had a board meeting or something, so the comments that I'm giving to you today, you know me, you've asked me to be open and fair and tell you the truth always, and that's what I will do, and I am a technical person, so I'm going to be giving you those inputs so we can understand them together. So we're committed to work together on something that you've put forward, We think we recognize the concerns of the people on the peninsula and the residents, and we want to work to address these concerns. I'm there very often myself, but also others do go there. We agree with you that there are great opportunities to enhance that corridor together with Caltrain. And I think you know as well, we have worked with Caltrain actually all the time we've been there, and Mike Scanlon, his staff, and myself and my staff work very well together to try and find a way forward. We also agree that we should be looking at all possibilities to reduce costs for the system, and in fact to ensure that the combined system on the peninsula becomes something that people need and can benefit from. The long-term nature of the project requires that we continue to plan, you mentioned it yourself, for the entire system and for the longer term, and I think we'll touch on that again in our discussion. But this does not mean that everything is cast in stone, and obviously there's flexibility, and we have to talk about that as well. However, as we have communicated also with your office, we have questions about the blended system. And
Mr. Van Ark, I apologize
yes.
for the interruption. For my colleagues, the core of the proposal is that for that stretch from San Jose to San Francisco, that rather than think of this as two separate systems with duplicative costs and impacts along the corridor, that we think about how we can use existing infrastructure upgraded, and we call it a 21st century Caltrain, which presumably would involve electrification and positive train control, so that we can have a blended system that integrates a 21st century Caltrain with high-speed rail. That's the fundamental core of the notion. And the reason for that is so that we can avoid the 60-foot viaduct up and down the corridor, so we can stay within the existing right-of-way, and so that we can avoid the extra billions that would be associated with doing a duplicative system. And when we get to the conversation about what the entire system is in a minute or two, when I let Mr. Van Ark get back on point, I think that's when the conversation will get interesting in a hurry. Back
Sure.
to you, sir.
So obviously our main concerns revolve around two laws that we believe we do have to, we don't believe, we know we have to meet and work according to. The one is Prop 1A. And if I talk a bit about Prop 1A from just a few aspects I'd like to put on the table, and that's from an engineering or design perspective. There are some parameters that are very clear, and therefore we don't know how we together can find a solution to these. And the one is that we have to be able to travel the time in a time of 30 minutes between San Francisco and San Jose. So that is one issue in Prop 1A, which we don't know what the solution is on that recommendation on the blended system. Second one is we have to have a capability to transition intermediate stations or to bypass these stations at mainline operating speeds. We can go into a little bit detail a bit later on, but that is an issue that clearly also has a very strong limiting effect on the capacity of the line. You understand that the two systems, high-speed and commuter rail system, operate at very different modes. Commuter rail systems have to stop at basically every station. High-speed rail doesn't want to stop at every station, and that's why to meet 30 minutes, you've got to get past these trains, and you cannot get past the trains because you're behind them, where they are loading and offloading passengers along the corridor. So I think for that reason, Prop 1A actually very clearly specified that you have to bypass these stations so that when a train is in the station, you must be able to bypass it. And the next thing is Prop 1A also refers and clearly states we have to have grade separation. Now, obviously, all these things may not be necessary right up front. And therefore, we have the other concerns from a legal perspective, and not maybe from a design perspective or an engineering perspective, from a legal perspective. We have the concern about the shortening of the planning horizon. Although high-speed rail is, we are fully on board with something I launched about 3 months ago at the board meeting, at one of our board meetings, which we term phased implementation. And phased implementation is something similar to what you're talking about. And we are, with phased implementation, we just have the issue that it is one phase that has to be planned to lead to further phases, so that at the end of the day, we meet what we believe is the requirement of the project, Prop 1A, and also the requirements of CEQA to declare and to say what the needs are, what the environmental needs are of the system we will finally be building.
How many phases are you anticipating on that corridor?
Well, that's the thing, Senator. When we launched this phased implementation, when we decided to go to the Central Valley and we had a bit more time on our hands, we said we now have to analyze phased implementation. Phased implementation is a more complicated issue because every section of the line between San Jose and down to Transbay Terminal has to be analyzed now and put into phases in a way that, if I want to give you an example, if you want to build a house and you know you're going to put a basement in it one day, you first got to put the basement in because you're not going to build the house and then later tear it down to put the basement in and start again. So more or less in that manner, you first got to define where you're going to get to so that whatever you're building on top of it or whatever you're going to be doing on top doesn't have to be ripped down and rebuilt again later on. So phased implementation, which we just initiated a while ago, does exactly that. We set aside a year and a half of going through the whole alignment to put phases in place so that we can up the alignment throughput. You must understand that even today, the alignment, the two-track alignment on the peninsula.
Mr. Van Ark, I apologize again for the interruption, but the question I had asked was how many phases. Is the short answer we don't know yet?
We
We're
have
still
to define
considering
it.
that?
We have to define it.
And yet the EIR process is underway, is that correct?
That's correct.
And an EIR typically is designed to assess the environmental impacts of a project, so if we don't know how many phases we're evaluating, how can we do the EIR?
No, the EIR there are various parts to the EIR, and I would hand it over to my expert when I need to, but the draft EIR document we would only be launching in the second half of 2012. So we are still working on the EIR document, and we have now agreed that within the EIR document, we would define the phased implementation plan.
All right, I'm going to let you continue, and then I'm going to ask a couple questions about how we might get TS taking an optimistic view on all this. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So what I wanted to mention to you about the corridor as well is, there are people that are talking about a two-track final solution. Again, if you take two tracks and you run a service on two tracks, we talk about a thing called headway. Headway is the safety.
I apologize, but just to be clear, I don't think you see the phrase two tracks in the statement, do you?
No, I know. I say some people. I didn't say you've got it in yours. So two tracks, I just wanted to give this example so that you do understand. If you've got two tracks and you have a headway of 5 minutes, that means the distance between the trains, the safety distance, is 5 minutes. That means you could theoretically run 12 trains an hour. When you start having high speed, higher speed, even the mini bullet or the baby bullets that they run today, and commuter trains stopping at every station, they interfere with each other's schedules. And as we see it today, and we're still busy doing further analyses, the capacity of that line, if you intersperse higher speed, not high speed, higher speed, and commuter rail services with each other, the capacity of the line is most likely in the region of about 6 trains per hour. Today, Caltrain already runs 5 trains an hour. Now, Caltrain
Must be traveling at a different time than I'm trying to get on the Caltrain, if you think they're 5 trains an hour.
And Senator, sorry, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. They travel 5 trains an hour. But those trains take 40 minutes because they don't stop at every station. Of the 5 trains they operate, 2 trains on the baby bullets, so they only stop at certain stations. 2 trains are what we would refer to as milk trains, so they stop at many stations, but not on every station. And 1 train is in between. So that's the schedule that they run, meaning that they service stations kind of between
Every hour on the hour they run that?
No, they run 5 trains starting in the beginning and starting at the end every hour. But they don't. But I wanted to get to the point. They only service.
Mr. Van Ark, let's be clear about this.
Yes.
Senator Lowenthal, if I walk down to the train station at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Palo Alto, I can assure you 5 trains are not going to be riding by that someone can get on to go north to San Francisco. I don't think that's what you're intending to suggest.
Okay, you're correct. I wanted to just come to the point of, if you run that service, you would still only service the stations in roughly every 40 minutes, on average. Some would.
If I was standing at that station at 2 o'clock between 2 and 3,
Yes.
maybe once every 40 minutes would a train stop there or so, but would I see 5 trains?
So the other disadvantage, you're right, no, not at
No.
not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So the other problem that you've got with high-speed rail and commuter rail is both services have got early morning and late afternoon peaks, both. You know that when you run an airport, the airports generally try and get the international traffic in around lunchtime, middays, because of the time shift between planes when they come in from other parts of the world. So that's how they try and schedule their schedules. High-speed rail, as well as commuter rail, have early morning passengers and they have late afternoon passengers, because if you as a business person want to travel, you generally want to leave early in the morning and get to your destination and do business. And then you want to come back in the late afternoon to get home for your evening. So that's the cycle. So when we talk about capacity, the peak capacities, early mornings and late afternoons, are very important. And unfortunately, the peak capacity of a commuter rail is similar to the peak capacity of a high-speed rail. It does not mean, again, that we do not want to move in this direction. Again, we've got limited capacity. We want to see whether we can use some of that limited capacity, and Caltrain is working with us. So we can use maybe 1 or 2 trains per hour and get high speed up and running in the corridor. But our main aspects remain the ones that, how do we meet the 30-minute time between San Jose because today it's 57 minutes. How do we meet the transition, the Prop 1A transition of the stations, which basically you need to reduce the time?
Does Prop 1A call out how many trains have to make it in that time?
In the time, no, they don't say how many trains have to make it.
So just to be clear, if a single train went from Los Angeles to San Francisco in the appointed time, that would meet the provisions of Prop 1A. Wouldn't be an ideal system. I think we can all agree on
yes,
that.
Yes, it says, I believe, it says without stopping. Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
All
and
right.
That's what it's designed for.
So if any time of the day or night, 24 hours in a day, a train can make its way from Los Angeles to San Francisco in the allotted time, then we've complied technically with Prop 1A. So that takes that challenge off the table in my judgment, because we can clearly make that happen. Not suggesting for a minute that's what you want to produce or that that's what we want to see. So now we're back to the CEQA issue, which was the third piece of the proposal. And we've had a circular conversation on this, in my judgment, and I want to see if we can stop chasing ourselves around the table on this conversation. Here's the challenge. To date, the High Speed Rail Authority has insisted on doing a environmental analysis for what it calls full build-out of a phased system. I think that's a fair characterization. The point that Assemblymember Gordon and Congresswoman Eshoo and I made was we need to scale down the project to something that can be accommodated within the existing right-of-way and that does not involve an aerial viaduct and that works using the existing system, both to avoid costs and impacts. We've also then said in the third point that's made that we called on the authority to abandon its preparation of an EIR for a phased project of larger dimensions over a 25-year time frame. The authority then comes back and says, relying on its legal counsel, that's your cue, relying on its legal counsel, that, no, we have to do the EIR for the full phased project. To which I then say, you wouldn't have to do that EIR if you scaled back your definition of a project. To which you then say, but we have to comply with Prop 1A, to which I then say, you can comply with Prop 1A as a legal matter. So I'm going to turn to you and or your staff and or your legal counsel and say, is it your view that CEQA requires you to do an EIR for a project you do not propose to build? And if the answer to that question is no, because I'm thinking it's going to be no, then if we simply scale back the project, aren't we able to scale back the EIR? And the reason for this question is, I don't want to see an EIR proceed for a project that is never going to be built, that probably never should be built, but that puts a sword over the head of every property owner up and down this very developed 50-mile stretch of the corridor. Clear enough? So let's go to either you or your legal counsel.
If I may, Senator, purely technically, we couldn't even travel between San Francisco and San Jose in 30 minutes. You would have to rebuild the alignment to achieve that.
Well, you've talked about using the existing corridor for what you call Phase 1, as I understand it, and moving trains up and down that corridor at 120 miles per hour.
No, we wouldn't be running at 120 miles an hour initially in Phase 1, in the first phase. We would have to rebuild that corridor to be able to get to those speeds.
And what does rebuild that corridor mean?
There are many bridges, tunnels, alignments, curves that have to be changed and completely rebuilt.
Okay, but you're still talking about staying substantially within the right of way to do that, you're still talking about avoiding a viaduct. And so we're not talking about a multi-billion-dollar mega project. We're talking about staying substantially within the right of way, avoiding a viaduct, and moving a train at 124 miles an hour, am I remembering? And 124 miles an hour over, I'm going to call that 50 miles. Is that fair?
That's right.
Okay. So if we were talking about that, then you can do that in 30 minutes.
As if you rebuilt, yes.
Okay. So understanding that it's not as if we're going to take your 21st century Caltrain and put it on those creaky old tracks that are still there, your 21st century high-speed rail program, put it on those creaky old tracks. But you can, in fact, make it in half an hour from San Francisco to San Jose without building a viaduct and still staying substantially within the right-of-way, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you can do it at 120 more miles an hour, you can get 50 miles in less than half an hour. And if you can do it in less than half an hour, you can comply with Prop 1A.
On that point, but not on the others.
Well, not on the others because?
Because the others require that I be able to transition stations.
And just to be clear, because there's been either some misunderstanding or misperception or misrepresentation about the proposal is to have people stay on the same train when they arrive in San Jose and move north to San Francisco. So south of San Jose, for the moment, and I understand that it will be an issue because I've got colleagues who've got interest in other parts of the geography, but south of there is not what I'm talking about. You told me in order to make it work, you had to be able to get from San Jose to San Francisco in half an hour, and we've now established that you can do that without building the multi-billion-dollar subsequent phases with the aerial viaduct outside the right-of-way.
Right.
To which I then say, great, why would we be pursuing an EIR for that scope of a project when there's no plan, when I'm suggesting, and others have suggested, that the plan should be scaled back to avoid the need to go in that direction? Let me just add, it's Ms. Aitchison?
Yes, that's
and,
correct.
And tell us a little bit about who you are and where you came from, what your practice is.
You go first.
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. My name is Danae Aitchison. I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the Land Law Section of the Attorney General's Office. And attorneys from the Land Law Section of the office provide the authority with counsel on its environmental compliance with various matters, particularly its compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. So I'm here today in my capacity as counsel to the client, not speaking for the office with a capital A and a capital G, but as counsel for the client on the environmental law issues.
So let me ask the question.
Certainly.
Does the High Speed Rail Authority, and I love this, I'm getting free legal advice, so this is nothing but helpful. Does the High Speed Rail Authority have to do an environmental assessment for a project it does not propose to build? That's a straight-out question, and I'd appreciate a straight-up answer.
I will do my very best to give you a straight-up answer. The High Speed Rail Authority is an entity, like other state agencies, that can propose projects. It's proposing a project. It's a public project. The definition of that project is one that has to comply with the governing laws that it's operating under. It has to build the system that's set out for it in law to build. Assuming that the proposal on the table for a project complies with all of that, then the agency has discretion to determine exactly how it might want to phase that implementation of that project, but it always has to be studying under CEQA the full extent of reasonably foreseeable impacts of the whole project. So it really
Stopping, please.
Okay.
Key phrase, whole project.
Yes.
So just to be clear, and if I restate what you've told me in a way that you think is incorrect or misleading, I want to give you every opportunity to correct it. So if the project were scaled back, and if it could be scaled back in a way that was compliant with 1A, then the only environmental assessment that would be necessary is for that scaled back project, as long as the scaled back project is compliant technically and legally with Prop 1A.
I think that's correct, but let me add one other thing, which is it wasn't entirely clear from the proposal regarding the time horizon issue and planning and doing environmental review out to the 2035 timeframe. Now, I don't know if that's an aspect of this discussion here.
This is why I say this has been a circular conversation, and I think my goal is to make it to stop, as I say, chasing around the table on this issue. I think the candor that Mr. Van Ark has provided and the candid answer you've given make it pretty clear. You do not have to do environmental assessment work for a project you are not proposing. And if you would recast the proposal, provided it is consistent with Prop 1A, then the environmental assessment work need only be done to the extent and scope of the recast proposal. We're clear on that?
I think we are clear on that, sir. The only key is that the time horizon under CEQA, it is required that as you're studying the whole of the action that's on the table, even if phased, you have to examine the reasonably foreseeable impacts.
And what I'm saying is, and what the proposal from the 3 elected officials says is, there's a phase, and then you're done. And we're not talking about going beyond that with the multi-billion-dollar viaduct project that goes well outside the existing right-of-way. And if the High-Speed Rail Authority said, you know what, we're prepared to accept that as our project, even looking out over the long-term horizon, then that is the reduced project that they would then be obliged to do environmental work on, yes?
Yes, the key, of course, is whether or not the definition of that project would meet the design characteristics for the system that are set forth in the law.
In Prop 1A.
Correct.
Yes. Great. Then I think we're headed down a good conversational path. Let me use a slightly more easily defined project. Have you ever been to the city of Palo Alto, where I live?
I certainly have. I'm a Stanford alum.
Great. Well, then you're familiar with what we call the Palo Alto process. In Palo Alto, we like to say that process is our most important product, actually, and I think Mr. Van Ark has been discovering that since his arrival in the community. If someone came to the Palo Alto City Council and said, I want to build a 400-unit condominium project. I want to do 200 units, and then 20 years from now, I want to come back and do another 200 units. You and I think, would agree that they have to do environmental assessment work for a 400-unit project, right?
I'm not sure I caught that. For the whole of the project?
For the whole of the project.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. But suppose the Palo Alto City Council said, as it might, you know, sorry, folks, you're only going to get to do 200 units. And you're only going to get to do 200 units, period, end of story, and that's what we're approving. Would the environmental assessment work only be for 200 units?
Well, under that particular circumstance, if your private applicant were to essentially withdraw, then the answer would be yes. And I think that's the question.
Let me just use a different phrase. Okay. If my private applicant were essentially to downsize his project from 400 units to 200 units and understand that that was the limited scope of the project, then that's the only thing that they'd be doing an EIR for, right?
Yes, that's correct. And the distinction would be, under that scenario, you may or may not have similar, legal implications for what is or isn't required as a public project. So here the authority is operating, as you have already identified, under the design characteristics of Prop 1A.
I think we're in my view, a much better place than we have been for a while, which is, I think we have clarity that the authority's position is that it has to deliver a project that is technically compliant with Prop 1A. And by the way, I see our Assembly colleague, Assemblymember Galgiani. I'm sorry I didn't see you through the rail and the bodies, but welcome and thank you for being here. I appreciate your interest. We have to build a project that's, the authority's view is we have to build a project that's compliant with 1A, and we have to do an environmental assessment that would be compliant with CEQA for a Prop 1A compliant project. And to which I would then say, great, let's have a conversation about what a Prop 1A compliant project might look like that doesn't look like what is currently being proposed for phase implementation between the time of today and the year 2035. Thank you. Senator Lowenthal, now that you've learned more about the area I live in than you ever had hoped to, any comments or questions?
This has been an ongoing education patience. And
Thank
this
you.
is not a one.
For all of us. For all of us.
And
Thank
so
you.
I'm just enjoying the process.
All right.
And seeing how agreement is arrived at, and I'm very impressed.
Ms. Fuller, anything on this issue?
Actually, are we ready to move to Southern California for a moment?
We are. Once we finish this item up, I want to give these folks a moment to pause, catch their breath. But unless you have questions about this issue, what I would like to do is go to public comment on this issue. And actually, I think probably the best bet would be to say if folks who wanted to offer comment could offer comment just sort of roughly first on this issue, if that's what they choose to speak to, and then others who have comments on high-speed rail, because we have a number of other items that follow. And let's get all of the public comment resolved, and then we'll go to members who have other issues for either the statewide implementation or for local aspects. Do we have members of the public who are here today to speak to this issue? Please raise your hands. Great, come on up, because if you'll line up, and I think we'll use this microphone here. My apologies, it's not really ergonomically correct, but if you'll just come on up and try and limit your comments to just a couple of minutes, please. I always ask if you have a topic sentence, if you remember that from high school, that's the best way to make sure we get your point, which is to start with your topic sentence and tell us the one thing you want to make sure committee members grab out of your testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, members, for this opportunity to speak. My name is Daniel Kraus with Californians for High Speed Rail. I'm the executive director, and our group represents the people of California that want this system badly. They voted for it in 2008, and polls show that they still strongly support this project, even on the peninsula. So we always remind everyone that this is the will of the public. We also, as an organization, support the idea of figuring out a way to make this situation on the peninsula work in terms of sharing the corridor with Caltrain and high-speed rail. And we want to work constructively with all parties to find solutions for this. However, we do have concerns about defining the project in a way, that will limit the capacity of the system and the speed, which was talked about here. And I hope not to see this get into a too technical legal argument. If we do that, we're really not honoring the will of the intent of the voters. I don't think voters want to see one train a day of full speed. They want to see a system they can expect to get on, 4 times an hour or maybe twice an hour, where they can get up down from L.A. to San Francisco in the 2 hours and 40-minute time frame that they voted on. I don't think their intent is to do it once a day. So I just want to make sure whatever arrangement is come about, that it's done in a way that honors the true intent of a system of high-speed rail that's true high-speed rail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please.
My name is Kathy Hamilton from Menlo Park, California. I wanted just to make a comment about the previous speaker's comment. The people of the California residents did vote for 1A, but they voted for it to be done in a responsible, fiscally responsible way. The concern I have is the discussion of phasing and this horizon. And when you're talking about horizon numbers in 2035, that means the word ridership. And the ridership has not been established to properly do an EIR, and if you had a phased implementation 20 years from now, it would be stale, and it is based on bad numbers. I just want to say that the ridership committee that CEO Van Ark has established will not have a solid proposal for nearly 2 years. That was in his presentation. It did say they'd give an update at the time of the business plan. But that cannot be an objective ridership study, because the premise is these numbers are really okay, let's tweak them. So I appreciate the efforts, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, Ravi Mehta, appearing on behalf of the cities of Palo Alto, Atherton, Menlo Park, and Pico Rivera. Transparency is very important. No matter what we build, it has to be built through transparency. Unfortunately, it appears that the High-Speed Rail Authority lacks a lot of transparency. They continue to hold meetings on the peninsula behind closed doors. They continue to have indicate to members in the community that information will be passed on to the board members. It appears that a lot of information and decisions that are being made without the information that is being given to staff and consultants at the authority. Kathy just brought up the issue of ridership. Ridership, no matter what we build, the very foundation of high-speed rail, whether it's a 2-track, 4-track, 2 stations, 10 stations, it's all got to be based on ridership. The ridership study by Cambridge Systematics, this committee through ITS has determined is fatally flawed. High-Speed Rail Authority has set up its own peer review committee, which again meets in secrecy. They've signed a confidentiality agreement that they can't discuss anything that they're doing with anybody. First, I think that violates the Brown Act, but much more beyond that. If we're going to be transparent, if this is the will of the people, that information should be provided to everybody. Lastly, Prop 1A requires that before any funding is provided to the authority, that they provide a business plan and a ridership study. Yes, they've got a ridership study. They've yet to provide a business plan. But I think inherent in Prop 1A is that both of these items have to be reliable. So giving you a ridership study in itself doesn't do anything. So I would ask this committee to, again, request that a new ridership study be provided, hopefully through ITS.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Charles Volz from CCHSR. My topic sentence is, don't waste money on a very expensive EIR that will be of limited, if any, value downstream. We're now in the throes of trying to decide on the peninsula whether it's going to be 2 tracks, 3 tracks, 4 tracks, where and when, etc., all of which the answer to that question is dependent on a valid, high-grade ridership study. I don't accept the notion that you can have a less quality ridership study that, quote, is good enough for government work, because the challenges of making the right answer on the peninsula are totally dependent on that valid, reliable ridership study. I'm a practical guy. It seems crazy to me to go ahead and do a full-fledged EIR based on to say the least, flimsy ridership study that provides the foundation for it. In addition, it's not only expensive for the state government and for federal funds that could well be wasted, it's going to cost each of the communities, the 20 or so cities on the peninsula, to come up with detailed responses to the draft EIR, which is going to require hiring consultants, etc. It's easy to estimate $1 million by local communities that don't have that money. So I beg you, don't fund an EIR that's going to be a waste.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. And I believe this is our final witness on high-speed rail issues before we go to other members of the committee and then march through the other high-speed rail items.
Thank you, Chairman Simitian and committee members. My name is Richard Tolmack. I'm president of the California Rail Foundation. My topic sentence is capacity and speed and ridership are all influenced by a change in scope, and the change in scope requires examination of other alternatives which have been shunned by the authority, such as the Altamont alternative. In many ways, this 2 hours, 40 minutes schedule does dictate action, and one of the ways it dictates action is you have to consider other ways of getting to Los Angeles that fast. And the thing is, if you have this capacity problem on the peninsula, which everybody has acknowledged, you must consider getting off that peninsula right-of-way before going the whole distance down to San Jose. And this is the thing that the authority has neglected for about 8 years now, and it needs to be reexamined now that the scope of this segment is being changed.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you for being here. I believe that completes public testimony. Anyone we left out on this item? If not, then let's bring the matter back to the committee and ask, I believe, Senator Fuller, you wanted to take us in a different direction, both literally and figuratively, if I understand it correctly. Why don't we ask you to go ahead and raise any questions or concerns you might like the authority to respond to.
Thank you. I think this is a lot easier, and I believe you're already on the way to curing this, but it is my understanding that this route has been settled, and I'm now talking more about the southern route from the Bakersfield through Palmdale portion. My understanding is that route had been settled years ago, and now we're just before I walked in here, I was told that we're considering reopening that alignment and maybe going a different direction that would undo agreements that have been approved and maybe subjecting the state to new costs for the EIRs and potential lawsuits. And so, anything that changes anything in this deal makes it way more difficult to do for all of us. So, why are we? Is it true, first of all, that you're considering a different realignment, and why is this action being considered now?
Yeah, it is true, and it has not yet been decided. It's being recommended to the board next week. The documentation will be available hopefully by this weekend. And the reason for looking at, and it's only an alternative, it is not, the other alternatives are still in play. I think there was some misunderstanding that everything else is now rejected. But this is an alternative as part of the process, as part of the environmental process. And as part of the investigation, it has become clear that what we've been analyzing and investigating up to now is becoming a lot more complicated than what one originally envisaged. And therefore, when one looked at other alternatives, it is clear that the grapevine alternative is definitely a possibility, and we would be requesting our board to allow us to further investigate that alternative. I think, if I may, Senator, there are going to be some meetings with some of the interested parties this afternoon and so on, because maybe some of the excitement just needs further clarification. That's why I said documentation has not yet been distributed. Unfortunately, it's the way that these things are done. An agenda was distributed, the documentation is now being distributed, and hopefully by having some of the discussions, people will feel more comfortable with what is being recommended. And again, the other alternatives do not fall away.
And I guess that was the first thing, is this probably when you are putting out an agenda that has an impact of this magnitude, and there's one group that knows about it, and there's another group that thought they had the route but doesn't know about it, that, maybe I could just suggest that you might want to do some announcements that there'll be stakeholder meetings with some dates around that, because it sort of doesn't go down well for one group to think they're sitting in a back room with someone else, and so on and so forth. So I'm just not going to go there too much more, but I would just specifically request that some realignment maps and meetings with both legislators and stakeholders to get the information out as soon as possible. Because now the way this place works is that I have information, and I've lived in both areas for extensive stretches of time. So the information is that one tiny, tiny city is more difficult to do something with than the whole EIR new thing that Tejon Ranch has put in place. It's miraculous. So I hope you're taking all those things into consideration. Yep. And you'll explain to us why, since there's already an existing train route going to one and there's not one going the other, just we need some clarification, and soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will, and we did try, just by the way, we spoke to a lot of people down there in the last few weeks before the agenda came out, but obviously we didn't talk to enough. So
just sending out some, we're having hearings on it here, and here's some realignment maps that would be very helpful, and because now that people have certain information given out by other people, probably it's going to be twice as hard to work with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned about, or maybe not concerned is the word, but I certainly have some questions on the update on item number 2 of federal funds. So I don't know if I should wait till the
Why don't
presentation.
we hold there and we'll finish up on these sort of more regional concerns. Anything on a regional level before we move on to the next item?
Not that it's on the agenda, except that I too wait for an updated business plan with ridership numbers that we. And this is an ongoing discussion we've had, and I don't have anything new to add.
Thank you. And the statement that Assemblymember Gordon and I released with Congresswoman Eshoo specifically referenced the concern about the credibility of the ridership studies as the base, and the use of those studies as the basis for this larger phased project, which we don't believe.
I concur. I mean, I think this legislature has been asking for that for the, and so this is a constant theme.
Thank you to Senator Fuller because her questions about agendas prompted me to remember a question I had forgotten. Could I ask the High Speed Rail Authority, do I understand that there is an upcoming agenda item sometime in the next month on this corridor that is an action item? I'm sorry, I'm speaking now of the San Francisco to San Jose.
The San Francisco San Jose board meeting agenda item is to inform the board on what we would intend to do in the way of phased implementation.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, I apologize.
So that is the item that is on the board minute.
The concern I have is that as I look at your May 5th monthly meeting agenda, item number 5, update on the San Francisco San Jose alternative section, under status, the letter A is there, which I believe indicates that it's an action item, and it also indicates that while, quote, staff will provide an overview of a phased implementation approach to be incorporated in the environmental document and an update of the alignments and station alternatives under study in the San Francisco San Jose HST section. It goes on to say the board will have an opportunity to provide direction for this section. Could you tell us what that means in terms of potential action? And we're having this conversation, and I thought it was a good first conversation, if you will, about how we might eventually get to yes. But I want to make, and I apologize for this use of terms up front, but I want to make sure the train hasn't already left the station as we continue to talk about all this. So can you give me some indication of what action is anticipated or some commitment that action won't be taken that precludes a change in course on these issues?
The recommendation by the authority to its board is that we continue for the next 18 months to do these studies, as I explained to you earlier on phased implementation, and that the draft EIR would thereby be completed in the, I think, in the fall of 2012.
And if you changed your mind a month from now because we had a different take on this,
we would go back to them with another recommendation or another proposal.
So just to be very clear, and if it appears that I'm trying to put you on the spot, it's because I am, Mr. Van Ark. No action you take at the May 5th meeting will preclude a change of course, should that be the wish of your board on the San Jose to San Francisco corridor.
There's nothing that I'm aware of that's going to change any course, right, Mr. Chairman.
Can I have your assurance that if you become aware of something, that before you make a recommendation to your board, you'll be back to us on this? Okay. And the one other question I have is, was this meeting originally scheduled to be in Sacramento, or was it originally scheduled, the May 5th meeting, scheduled to be in another location? Ms. Porvahidi, can you help us with that?
There was some discussion earlier in the year to have it in San Jose, but then it was rescheduled to be here in Sacramento.
Okay.
And the reason for that would be?
That was a decision made due to one of the agenda items that we do have on our agenda is a small business and DVB policy. It's Small Business Enterprise Month in the state. There was some coordination we were trying to make through the governor's office potentially to coordinate some type of press release. That was one of the reasons why moving it to here to Sacramento.
Okay. Mr. Van Ark and Ms. Porviti and Ms. Aitchison, I think you are where we're asking you back to our next meeting and the meeting after that, and that's in your plans, yes?
The next meeting is May 5th. Is that correct? That's our board meeting date that causes some difficulty.
We're happy to work with you to sort that out so that you can be present on May 5th, however, understanding that you have some things scheduled. So can I have your commitment that you'll be here?
We'll be in Sacramento. Most of the board items are unfortunately my items, Mr. Chairman. So I have a, we start at 9:30.
The high-speed rail items that we have on the agenda for that day are also your items, sir.
Yeah, I know. So we have to find a solution.
So just so we're clear, is that a commitment you'll be here?
I will have to consult with my board, Mr. Chairman. I have another board too. I have a board, I have a chairman there too.
I'm going to ask the question one more time. Are we going to have you here?
I will have to consult with my board. I'm sorry, but
Okay. I think you're looking for $200 million this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then I think you have to make the case to both houses of the legislature that the $200 million is going to be responsibly spent to a good purpose. And it would be my strong encouragement to you to be here to make that case. If you're not here to make that case, then I think you have to accept responsibility for the fact that you were not here to make that case. All right, let's move on to update on federal funds. Any updates from the High-Speed Rail Authority on federal funds relative to what we've got in our agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I believe what's in the agenda and the information that's contained in the various paragraphs of the agenda is correct. The values are what we know and what we have. As it's stated here, California has not lost any of the monies due to the reductions in high-speed rail budgets in Washington, D.C. What has happened is the FY11 budget of $2.5 billion was reduced to zero in Washington, but that does not affect us. And $400 million of the Florida money was reduced. That means today there is $2 billion in Florida money still awaiting distribution by the federal government. We have been told that would be decided, and that should be now in about 2 weeks' time, that $2 billion would still be allocated. We had applied for $1.4 billion thereof, and with some options upwards. And we know that there have been many applicants for that money in Washington.
Thank you. Senator Lowenthal, any questions about prospects for federal funds?
Yeah, I just want to know how the board, what contingency plans there are and what messages there are. And I realize this may not have come yet before the board, or the board may not have addressed this, but right now we have a plan in which with the federal funds that have already been proposed, that we're going to have a line between Borden and I believe Schaffner, and that if there are the additional up to $1.4 billion, that will go from Merced possibly down to Bakersfield. That's the plan, and that seems where you're planning at this point. However, with the federal government, you're saying zeroing out in the 2011 budget, I think, any funds, and if in fact $1.4 billion is not received, but significantly less than that, if any, is received, how will that impact the ongoing commitment on the part of the, or how will the board deal with that commitment? And is there, right now we have a very, I think, aggressive, although there's no time frame, but the belief that there'll be significant amounts of federal funds coming. But potentially, I'm not saying, let's hope it doesn't happen, but potentially a message coming from Washington, it's not coming, the money, or not that. Will there be contingency plans that we will see, and when would we see those plans?
Senator Lowenthal, the This is not the statement of the board, and you're correct. This needs to be further debated by the board.
That's right, and I'm not asking for the statement. I'm just asking for the
but-
process.
but-
I'm from Palo Alto,
Sure.
and it's the process.
We're proud to have you, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
And you know that when
And
yes,
I understand that what I'm asking is just yourself.
but you understand also that when we put our business case forward to you, which we've agreed with you in October, for the 14th of October, these aspects will also be contained in the business case. But quite clearly, if you build high-speed rail systems, and any high-speed rail system anywhere in the world, any high-speed rail system anywhere in the world, has required a lot of federal funding.
That's right.
And the same applies in the United States. And yes, we are subject to a big amount of federal funding. And as you know, too, at this stage, the president has got $53 billion planned over a period of 6 years. And we do not know, you and I, we do not know where that will end up. But it is clear that if you want to build a high-speed rail system, we get a little bit back to the discussion on the peninsula, but high-speed rail is about connecting people over long distances at high speed. Mm-hmm. And it's about people, long distance, and high speed.
Right.
And that is not cheap, and has not been cheap anywhere in the world. And it has not been done by the private sector anywhere in the world. It's been done by the public sector with the participation of the private sector. And if the public sector is not able or willing to put that money forward, there is not high-speed rail. And I don't think we should be hiding behind any bushes on that issue. It is just fact. It's the same thing in the United States as it is in any other country in the world. So the authority had put in their budget $19 billion requirements for federal funding. And if this type of money is not going to become available, it becomes problematic to build a high-speed rail. And I think it is therefore important, I've often said it, the year 2011 is an important year because a lot of those things are playing in Washington, but also here. And that will have an effect on where we go with high-speed rail.
Right. That has tremendous implications and critical about decisions about where decisions are made under a certain set of assumptions, and so things need to be readdressed. And I'm not asking you now to do that. I'm not saying that that you're. This is reality, and the denial of reality gets us into much more trouble than. And I'm not saying that in any way at this moment. I'm just anticipating that decision points will come up very soon, and we would like to be part of, or at least open to communication clearly, because these are far beyond California at this moment, and flexibilities may be needed greater, and between the state and the federal government, communication there needs to be much clearer. It's nice to have wishes and wants, and we're there, but this project is much too important for all of us out here and yourself and the High-Speed Rail Authority not to make the most realistic kinds of decisions. And I'm not saying you have not up until now, but the reality is potentially changing, and we need to be communicating very clearly as we move forward now.
Good.
All right. We are at item number 2, update on federal funds. Do either the Legislative Analyst's Office or the Department of Finance have comments? Decided this is a conversation you don't want to wade into, huh? All right, good. That takes us to item number 3, which is an update on High-Speed Rail Authority staffing. We're at agenda, this page number 10. It's an informational item. I think we've had quite a bit of conversation previously, Mr. Van Ark, about the need for positions and to have those positions filled. And I guess the question is, how are we doing? How many positions currently vacant? What subject matter areas are still lacking staff? Let's start there, I think.
Again, the information in front of you is correct and updated. That means we have at this stage 19 people on our staff out of the 37 that we should be allowed to hire. The process has received quite a bit of momentum at this stage. Firstly, the 6 exempt positions have been approved, although obviously we're having to work with many departments to get this done, so we are at this stage working with our HR group, which is through DGS, with the Department of Finance, together with the Personnel Department and everybody, to get the process through. We have the first few positions now clarified and cleared, ready, in fact, one of them for hire. I think that the momentum has now just picked up, that we're going to be able to start hiring in the very short term, start hiring some of these people.
Particular areas where there's a gap in the organization at this point?
Everywhere.
Senator Lowenthal, any questions on this item?
No.
Legislative Analyst Office, Department of Finance. Anything else you want to share with us at this point from the authority? All right, let's move on to item number 4, please. We have a number of budget change proposals. These are on page 11, pushing towards a couple $100 million, with a couple of items being the bulk of that. Let me ask the authority, contractor work plans completed and shared with the committee when?
We believe that we should be done with those in the next 3 weeks approximately.
Okay, and those will be shared with the committee?
Yes, we'll be able to share them, no problem.
And focusing for a moment on the status of the fiscal consultants contract.
We received 6 bids on a new RFP that went out. We are having orals with the 3 remaining contestants on Tuesday, Wednesday, next week, in fact. And hopefully by the end of next week, we'll be able to move ahead with them.
And Mr. Van Ark, I think you referenced the fact an updated financial plan is to be delivered to the legislature pursuant to current law now by October 14th.
Correct.
And that will happen.
Correct.
Thank you. Senator Lowenthal, anything on this item? Legislative Analyst Office, Department of Finance. All right. Then I think that takes us to the very end of your items for the day.
So we're going to hold this.
We're going to hold this out. Yes, the recommendation is to hold open. Thank you for clarifying. No, that's helpful. We're going to hold these items open pending additional detail. And Mr. Van Ark, speaking of that additional detail and your schedule for when we're meeting next week, I understand you're going to get back to us on that. Sure. Our staff will be happy to work with your staff and your board if it would be helpful to set up a time certain so that you could count on being here at a particular time and spending a quality hour or so with us. And then your board would know that perhaps during that break time they could do other business. But we want to make it as easy as possible for you to be here to make your case.
Okay. And as you can tell, we work through lunch.
So it's good.
So do we.
So good. There you go.
Maybe somebody will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to CTC. Senator Lowenthal, how would you feel about a 5-minute break?
Fine.
All right, folks, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
What time do you think we'll be finished for playing?
I guess another hour.
One more hour, Joe? In terms of needing me to be at 1 more hour?
I think so.
Okay. I think it was very important.